heavenly things.
Nicodemus is a character who appears only in the Gospel of John. Oh, well, he's also in some of the Gnostic and apocryphal New Testament writings. He's in the Acts of Pilate. He has his own book, his snippets of him. But in John, he has a kind of particular function, and he's a type. It's kind of a meme for John's Gospel. But I want us to kind of tear that little meme apart for a little bit and remind us that the Gospels are written 100 years after the beginning of the first millennium, as we call it, and then are writing about something that happened 70 years before. So John's Gospel, at the time it was being written, things were happening in the Johannine community that were occurring in the synagogues. There was a rift between Jews and Jews who did not believe Jesus was the Messiah and Jews who did believe Jesus was the Messiah. And those who believed Jesus was the Messiah were causing a terrible problem and rift in many a synagogue. And synagogue leaders were coming to them and saying, "We think you need to leave." This was causing anger, distress, and finds its way into John's Gospel. And what finds its way into John's Gospel finds its way into the world after that in anti-Semitism. Our translation we read this morning did a very good job of trying to mitigate some of what John's Gospel uses as Jews when he's really referring to leaders in the community, people of a higher caste or class. And sometimes John's Gospel goes out of its way, especially in the crucifixion stories, to make it appear as if Jesus' death was entirely the fault of the Jewish community. The other thing that was happening at the time that John's Gospel was being written was that Jews were being persecuted by Rome because of what had happened during the revolt, during what the stories we know about what happened on Masada. So John's community was trying to separate itself from the Jews to the Romans so that they would not be persecuted. All that is going on in the background. At the same time, Nicodemus is a Pharisee. And Pharisees were not just one thing. Pharisees have become a meme for us, right? It's being Pharisaic, being one way. Well, Pharisees were all over the map. Pharisees were the rabbis that had become into being when the temple was destroyed and the people were in Babylon and they had no temple to worship at. They began forming what became synagogues and teachers who became rabbis. So many, many hundreds of years later, we now have these two different people. We have the Sadducees and the priests and the Pharisees. And one group is very much involved in maintaining the temple, and the other is very much involved in teaching Torah. And sometimes they come together. Sometimes the Pharisees are of an upper class and an upper caste and sit in the Sanhedrin and help to run the temple and the community in Jerusalem and collaborate with the Romans. And some Pharisees are teachers a lot like Jesus. A lot of them even had the same messages that Jesus had about loving your neighbor as yourself. Our Nicodemus today, John's Gospel uses him as a foil in a way, and as a sign perhaps that there were some good people in the community in Jerusalem. But I want us to hear the story of Nicodemus a little bit differently. So today I've kind of redone it a bit, and Tom and I are going to redo it for you, and it involves some music. I'm a little nervous about this, so just send me your energy. It is night. In a world lit by fire, it is night. In a world with no street lamps, it is night. And the moon has not yet risen, which is a good thing for the walker who doesn't want to be seen or heard. He comes. Shh. He comes. Nicodemus, talking to
himself,
rehearsing
questions.
If you saw him that night in Jerusalem, parsing the narrow streets, walled streets, doors in the walls, hand brushing the stone walls as a guide in the dark, balancing.
Whisper talking to himself.
If you saw him, you would be surprised because he was not normally a night walker.
He was a daylight man.
A well-dressed man.
An educated man.
Erudite. Knew people.
He knew everyone.
Prominent.
A religious leader.
A kind of religious oligarch, and yet a man with so many questions.
He didn't know which one to ask first. He was nervous.
He was embarrassed.
But he had all these questions. He was driven to know more about everything, to understand the sky and the stars, the meaning of things, where to start, how to begin.
Nicodemus knew the names of things. He knew the rules for Sabbath supper, the hope of Israel, what it meant to sanctify ordinary life.
He was considered an expert on everything holy. He was a man who knew what he knew.
But this night, he was tied up in knots, walking swiftly,
scuffling on the cobbled stones, cloak flapping in the night.
He knocks on a door.
Did you ever wonder how he knew which door?
Yeah. Who gave him the address? Did they write it down?
Who wrote it down? Some disciple?
Maybe it was marked. Maybe the door was marked with a secret sign.
Like an X?
Exactly. It had an X on it. There he is.
He's just outside the door. Does Jesus open the door?
Well, he had to. He gets in. They have a conversation. Somebody had to open the door.
Was anybody else with them?
We don't know. The story doesn't say.
So, which question does he ask?
None. He compliments him.
About what? How well-spoken he is for one from Galilee?
He could have asked him anything. No, it's worse. Over the top. He says, "Oh, Rabbi," and goes on and on. "You are so great. You have to be from God. Nobody could do what you do unless you were from God."
Do you think he was messing with him? He could have been a spy. He was a particular kind of Pharisee.
I think he was a little starstruck, intimidated. Jesus sees right through him, though, goes right for him. Pa-chow!
Pa-chow?
Pa-chow! And then Jesus says, nobody sees the kingdom of God unless they are born from above.
What?
Exactly. Now who's messing with who?
Is this where Nicodemus blows it?
Pretty much.
He could have asked him anything. The meaning of life. What does it mean to be Nicodemus? Why do the innocent suffer?
Where was God then? And where is God now? I don't think he asked for what he really wanted.
He came all that way to the wrong part of town by night. What did he finally ask?
He gets literal. He asks if a person can go back in their mother's womb to be reborn.
No. He has to be messing with him.
He could have asked him anything.
He could have asked him anything.
Could have asked him anything. Just think about that. There he was. He'd come all this way at night. Because he was a Pharisee, he didn't want people to know he was on this part of town, going to see this particular teacher from Galilee. Wouldn't have been right. Wouldn't have been the right thing. And Jesus says, you know, if you do not believe the things you see, and remember, Nicodemus begins by stammering all about how wonderful it was he sees Jesus doing. If you do not believe the things you see, how will you hear about the things you don't see? So we only hear about Nicodemus in John's Gospel 3 times. And each time he is described as the one who comes to Jesus by night. That's an important component for John's Gospel about who Nicodemus is, that he had to come somehow on the sly. And the next time we hear about him, he's at a meeting at the Sanhedrin, and they're talking about Jesus and what to do with him. And basically what Nicodemus says is, well, you know, we could give him a trial. And the next time we see him, he's with Joseph of Arimathea, and they've gone to Pilate to get permission to take Jesus' body down from the cross. And he has funded the buying of ointments and herbs and all of the things that are needed to embalm the body, to smooth the body, to prepare the body for the tomb. And that's all we know. But it seems to me that in our lives, just like those 2 pieces of contemporary writing that Steve read so wonderfully, that we ask questions about the world and we stay so much on the surface. We never really ask for what we really want, what we need to know. That when it comes time, especially about life of the Spirit, especially about what it means to be a person who believes in God, especially about what it means to be a Christian, all of those things for us tend to be asked at such a distant level. Because if we get deeper, if we push ourselves out into the deep edge of the pool, it might get a little scary. It might be possible that we won't hear the answer, or we won't hear the answer we want to hear, or we'll get to that spot where there's a cloud and we cannot pursue deeper. But it is important that you ask the question that you need to have an answer to, that is built up within yourself, that must be asked. Whether you ask it in silence, whether you ask it at the edge of the water, whether you ask it at dinner, Whether you ask it in the courtyard, life is short. And if you never ask that question, you will never know what answer there might be. There is a Rumi poem that goes like this. The breezes at dawn have secrets to tell you.
Don't go back to sleep.
You must ask for what you really want.
Don't go back to sleep.
People are going back and forth.
Across the doorsill where the two worlds touch.
The door is round and open.
Don't go back to sleep.